Good afternoon. I'm Shelley Richardson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Statewide Independent Living Council. And I'm so glad that we were able to host today's webinar that's titled Introduction to Deaf Culture. This is going to be a very interesting topic, and I'm looking forward. Also, I want to remind you before I forget that in February, we're going to be presenting an Introduction to Deaf Culture. So stay tuned, and we'll be advertising that shortly. For a visual description of myself, I am a heavyset, middle-aged white female with red hair, and I'm wearing an orange, gray, and black colored top, and I'm sitting in my office. And my pronouns are she and her. Some housekeeping. If you will turn your attention to the bottom of your screen, if you'll put your pointer down there, you will have some icons come up. And please keep in mind that our chat, where it says chat, is only if you're having a technical issue and you have a question about that. And Tara is here to help with that. But for your questions and answers, please put them in the Q&A box. And at the end of the presentation, we will get to them and be able to answer all of your questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to our two moderators to introduce themselves, Herschel Jackson and Angela Botts. So I'll leave it to you, and they will introduce you to the speaker today.
Hello there. I am Herschel Jackson with the Illinois Center for Independent Living in Rock Island. I'm here as a deaf services advocate, and I also am a chairperson or a vice chairperson for SILC for the board. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you. Hello, I am Angela Botts, and I have blonde curly hair, shoulder length, and I have a navy blue sweater on, and it says London across the front. I white skin. I'm smiling. I'm happy to see all of you. I'm a chairperson for the statewide deaf services coordinator, and our speaker Carol is one of our members, and I'm very excited that we have her here today for SILC's webinar on deaf culture. So it's very important, and I look forward to what Carol has to say and share with us. So please welcome Carol. Carol Nemechek, welcome. Well, hello. I am Carol, and before we go on, I just want to give you a visual description. I have a black background, and I'm wearing a black sweater that is full-length sleeves, and I have a necklace on. I have brownish, reddish, curly hair with black glasses, and I am a white female. Okay, so is everybody ready? Everybody look ready for this presentation on deaf culture. I want to thank everyone here, Herschel and Angela, and inviting me to present today. Okay, my topic today is deaf culture. Just a general overview. Next slide, please. We have different topics that we're going to go through: the introduction, timeline, deaf culture. There's a whole slew of topics related to that. CODA and deaf Bing. Next slide, please. Before I start, I just wanted to introduce myself, a little bit about me and who I am. I am deaf. I was born deaf. I'm third generation from a deaf family. My grandmother was deaf from Wisconsin. And so it's very nice. There were no communication barriers, but my father's side was all hearing. But we signed or gestured or wrote notes. Growing up in Chicago, I was in a mainstream school setting for 4 years before I transferred over to the Illinois School for the Deaf. where my father graduated from, and also my brother. And then I was the third one to graduate from there. My mother graduated from the Wisconsin School for the Deaf in Delavan, Wisconsin. And but I went to Jacksonville at Illinois School for the Deaf and then graduated from Gallaudet University. I have a bachelor's degree and then in home service, children and home services, and then graphic design. And later on, I got my master's in teaching ASL. So I have those three degrees, and I moved back here to Illinois, and I've been working as a deaf services coordinator for the Progress Center for Independent Living in Park Forest for 22 years, for Forest Park rather, for 22 years. And I've been teaching ASL classes at College of DuPage for a while. So that's all about me. So next slide, please. It's important to be aware of just a general timeline of deaf culture and why it's important that we become familiar with the timeline. And I'm just going to do a brief synopsis of different times. I'm not going to go on about them, but for example, there was a Spanish person who was a monk, a Spanish monk, and he was the first person to teach deaf children. He taught deaf individuals. He taught noble children, nobility. And then in the 1760s, approximately, um, there was a man named Abbé de la Paix, and he was a Frenchman who established the first deaf school. It was in Paris. And he learned and he taught sign language, and they figured out the best method for communication and signing. See, they would use sign language. In America, in the U.S., we call it American Sign Language. In France, they call it LSF, Long Language LSF. It's the French words meaning French Sign Language. So in America, it's just like there are different languages, and I will talk about that more in detail later on. And then in the 1770s, they established the first oral school for the deaf in Germany. And they focused more on lip reading and spoken language. And they focused on that, and they did not utilize sign language. And then 1817, Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, he traveled all over Europe and he met different individuals. And one man that he met was Laurent Clerc. And that was a deaf gentleman. And together they talked about how they could establish the first American school for the deaf, which was located in Connecticut. So they established that first residential school for the deaf there in Connecticut. And then moving on to 1856, the Columbia Institution for Deaf and Dumb and Blind, and we use a different sign for dumb. We cover up the mouth because dumb meant not speaking, not the sign for dumb like not being smart. So they did not speak. So they were behind. They were equivalent to their hearing peers. They just did not speak. And that was established in Washington, D.C., and it became later on known as Gallaudet College and then later Gallaudet University. And that's located in Washington, D.C. Next slide, please. Moving on to 1960. In the 1960s, there was a gentleman by the name of William Stokey, and he published about sign language structure and he was a linguist, and he taught at Gallaudet University, and he researched linguistics, and he was able to identify that yes, American Sign Language is its own language, and it's actually there's quite a bit of evidence in regards to that, and then later on in the 1970s, the concept of deaf culture started, And people started picking up and understanding more about linguistics and culture and the overlap between those things and the deaf community. Moving on to 1988, Deaf President Now. That was a landmark matter involving deaf people at Gallaudet University. They wanted a president. They hadn't had a deaf president at Gallaudet University. Always a hearing person um, became president at Gallaudet. The students, the faculty, the staff, and even high school students, elementary school students on campus at the Kendall Demonstration Elementary School there at Gallaudet. So the Kendall School is K through 8, and then there's the Model Secondary School for the Deaf, MSSD. Uh, that's ninth grade to 12th grade, and that's on the campus of Gallaudet University. They were angry and they started a protest for a week where they marched and they wanted to be they wanted the media recognition, and the world got to see that this school was very involved in this protest. And fortunately, at that time, I was a Gallaudet student there in 1988, and I witnessed this and I was involved. And it was the march. We marched to the Capitol, to hotels. We were there protesting that we wanted a deaf president. It was a rich experience for all of us, and it was a rich experience to witness. And the camaraderie and the teamwork that we enveloped, there were four leaders who were instrumental that I will never forget. And they were wonderful in that whole protest. And then the 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act passed, and that includes deaf people, not just disabled people, about rights, and it's open, that everything is open for everyone, and everything should be accessible for everyone. And now, I wanted to mention that in 1905, it's important to note the I love you handshake, if you're familiar with that. That spread quickly. It was from 1905. So, the next slide will explain a little bit more about that, please. Some people don't understand, why is that the handshake for I love you? Well, if you look at each individual shape, there's the letter I, the letter L, and the letter Y, and you put them together into one sign, and that becomes the I love you handshake. Deaf people use that as part of our culture. It's what we tend to do. If you meet someone, you say goodbye to them, you wave goodbye. It's just a habit. It's part of our culture. If you're saying goodbye, you wave the I love you handshake. So those things are just incorporated strongly within our culture. So that has spread, and hearing people, ASL students, people who work with deaf children tend to use that sign as well. And it's really unique, and it's a special sign. And it really caught on quickly. You can see it on different merchandise, shirts, eyeglasses, different things, blankets, you name it. Everything has that logo on it, that picture of the I love you handshake. And I will see that and I'll notice that, is that a deaf person or not? No, it tends to be a hearing person who has some type of merchandise on. Wow. So next slide, please. So deaf culture is the heart of the community everywhere in the world. In different countries, there's quite a connection, an instant connection at deaf festivals, deaf fairs, uh, conferences, deaf conferences. There are different connections and bonds that you create when you're with someone who understands your similar culture.
You see that all over. Um, and you see the captioning. They just can't separate language from culture. They're bound to each other always. Both of them are there. So language and culture are inseparable. I can explain a little bit more about that later. Okay, next slide. We actually have 7 aspects of deaf culture, and I'll explain each of them. There are really specifics under each category: language, values, intersectionality, traditions, norms, things that you can identify, identity, education, and I'll add information little by little. But by and large, these are the main topics regarding deaf culture. Okay, next slide. Language. American Sign Language includes handshake and just a litany of specificities. Now, some people might say ASL is just gestures. I want to clarify some things about that. ASL is a visual language for communication. We have our own grammar. And we still have to do written English. That's still a requirement. We have to follow English rules when we write. But in American Sign Language, we don't follow the English rules. For example, the subjects or the objects, or the object and the verb with the subject, those are all moved around quite freely in American Sign Language. And that's what creates understanding. That's the ASL grammar. However, in written English, we still have to follow those rules. So there's American Sign Language, which is my first language. So it's my L1, whereas English is my second language. Once I was born, I learned to sign right away. So that was my primary language, American Sign Language. And then my second language was English. And so I learned them in concert with one another. In each country, you'll find that they actually have their own signed languages, and we respect those. Sometimes we might borrow a sign from another culture or another language. For example, in American Sign Language, there might be a sign, and I end up going to a different country. For example, there's universal signs that are used that we learn. Of course, we learn American Sign Language throughout our years, but however, when we get out in the community, we find that we enjoy signing and learning about the signs used in other cultures. Some of them are just beautiful. Okay, next slide. As I explained, American Sign Language has its own rules, its own structure, as I've already mentioned. The subjects and the objects can be moved around. And the non-manual markers or non-manual signs mean use of eyebrows or mouth shapes to set the tone. You know, when you speak, you have vocal inflection, and that's how people can identify that. But deaf people obviously don't have a voice to speak in that way. However, we identify and follow with those non-manual markers, and that shows the tone of a sentence. For example, the sign's small, or I might say the house is so small. In spoken language, deaf people say, "Oh my gosh, that house is so small." That little tiny movement, the non-manual marker on the lips, shows that it's such a small size. Like in English, we'd say the house is so small, and you'd have vocal inflection to show that. Well, in sign language, it's an inflection shown on the face. It could be S, it could be it could be cha. Those different shapes on the mouth are what determine the tone. And we have the rules for that in American Sign Language. That creates the grammar. Some deaf people will borrow ASL grammar rules when using written English because maybe their written English skills aren't adequate as they were raised, or they're behind or language deprived. So here, I'll give you a funny story. Maybe this will help illustrate. Like the sign but, B-U-T. The sign for but looks like, this like this, two fingers separating side by side. That's the sign for but. There was a deaf man driving along one day, and he pulled up to a train track, and the gates went down. The car sat, and he waited and waited and waited for it seemed like forever, and he had to get off to work. He was boiling because he was so angry. He thought, I waited here all this time with the gates down. It seemed like maybe the gates were broken. I mean, the train had already gone by quite a while ago. The gates didn't go back up. So he looked both ways. He saw a worker over at the gatehouse just sitting there. He tried to flag him down, and the man walked up to him, and the deaf person wrote, please, B-U-T. The man looked at that and didn't understand. It was such a struggle, back and forth, back and forth. He read it over and over again because what the deaf man wrote was what he borrowed from American Sign Language, right? So in writing, he looked at it and it didn't make any sense. He's like, look, those gates need to go up. And that's the ASL sign for but. The deaf person wasn't quite sure how to write that. But what he wanted to say was open the gates using the ASL gesture for but. That's pretty far out, right? Because it explains how the deaf person didn't quite understand how to use their English, but they knew what they wanted to say in ASL because it's his own language. But the hearing person thought of like, please, but. I know that's one of the cute stories that gives an example of how the gesture is used. Okay, next slide. There's a deaf artist. Important because they share traditions and values that are part of deaf culture through their artwork. You look on the left, it says, is ASL a universal language? And the deaf person answers, well, no. The hearing man says, well, why not? And the person says, well, is English a universal language? He crossed out the ASL and substituted English. And the hearing guy's like, oh, of course not. Oh, of course there's no universal spoken language. Why would each country has their own? Oh, that's when the light bulb goes on and he realizes, well, that makes sense. So he realizes that gestural communication is equivalent to spoken languages, that there's languages in each country that are their own. It's kind of a cute way to demonstrate it. English is in America, but ASL is only in America. Now we're noticing more and more English here and there in other countries. And there's people in those other countries that want to learn ASL. More of a broadening issue. Okay, next slide. Here's another deaf cartoon, the do's and do nots. Tried to communicate with a deaf person by making faces. Finally, the deaf guy starts laughing. But don't scream at a deaf person hoping that they'll be able to hear you. You've been screaming for no reason because I can't hear. You're wasting your time hollering. Okay, next slide. So here, there's that hearing woman. So your dad can't hear at all? Not a thing? And the boy says, well, no, he's deaf. And the lady thinks, oh, I'm so, so sorry. And the boy says, so you don't know any ASL at all? And the woman says, well, no, I don't. And the boy's like, oh, I am so sorry. Right? The irony's there and it makes it equal. She said she's so sorry to the child. And he's like, well, I feel sorry for you because you don't know any sign. No difference there. Okay. Yeah. Now let me explain. Okay, we've gotten through that, but let's talk about another aspect, values. So literature is so important to preserve sign language. Artists preserve things through their artwork. So we have evidence that's preserved over time. At Gallaudet University, they have archives where they reserved artwork. Or, for example, there's a deaf woman just has done some beautiful, beautiful work on campus at Gallaudet University and at some deaf schools throughout the area. And that art is something we preserve because deaf artists preserve their own experiences and the trials and tribulations that they've gone through in a pictorial manner. They show a story through their artwork, and it leaves a visual representation. And so that's something that we can pass down to generations. And then it also is transparency and communication. And that's how we demonstrate our legacy. So there's different ways that those things are preserved. Go ahead to the next slide. Intersectionalities, signed this way. The deaf community, it's really important to understand that the deaf community is filled with intersectionalities because of disabilities. There's challenges and experiences that each person has that are different. And it requires additional collaboration to create accessible spaces. So let's go. What do you think? What do you think? It's important to have interpreters involved as well. Interpreters are so important. And we have to think of other disability groups and make accommodations for them when socializing with deaf people. We see that we need to make some modifications even when we collaborate with the deaf community. For example, one thing I've noticed is this word, intersectionality. In the past, what happened in Minnesota, for example, with the George Floyd incident, that caused a huge problem in the Black community, but not only in them, but in the disabled Black community as well. The people with disabilities who were Black were upset as well. Many of them didn't have information to know what was going on. They didn't understand the incident. And so then they had more specific people they called out that were able to learn and share those things and start to finally get the information they needed to unlock their feelings. And, what the deaf Black community had to share, or the Hispanic community, or the Asian Black, or the Asian deaf community, each of them had their own understanding that they were growing so they could work together to demonstrate respect, and they had more time to take in information and actually see the truth about what all was going on and to collaborate. And that's been true over the last few years. And it's really been a beautiful cooperative effort. Really love. The deaf community is so small and the world's so large. Many deaf people who are out there in those areas really don't know a lot about what's happening around them and throughout their state even.
And there is culture related to intersectionality. It's quite important. For example, sign language, uh, knowing the different skin colors, who is interpreting for whom. We need to work together and collaborate and really respect the process and really improve and take the time for the deaf spaces. It's very important. It's very important. I will explain that more a little bit later on about the community. Next slide, please. Traditions. We value passing on of our traditions. Storytelling, that has been passed on from generation to generation. I recall my mother telling stories, and I'd say, "Where did you learn that?" And she learned it from her parents, and they passed it on to her. And then in turn, she passed it on to me. So we share that with our deaf children. We share these stories that are passed on. And these are old stories from generations ago. We share experiences, especially um, mostly from the residential school for the deaf, stories from nighttime when you were just telling stories, or at the deaf club. There were so many stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. Or um, we would get the big movie reels and we would invite people, deaf people, over to watch home movies, and it would have captions. There were no captions out in the theaters, but we would have the big reels that we would watch, and we would gather everyone together to watch movies. We are involved in different events in the community. Um, there's the National Association of the Deaf, otherwise known as NAD. I've known about NAD since I was a young girl because my parents attended NAD conferences and they would always take me along. And I learned a lot by watching all the people that were there in attendance. And I met so many people, and I didn't understand exactly what my future would be, but but I understood my rights and I understood fighting for our rights. And I was able to learn that from other people. And that was ingrained in me at a young age. And we also have state chapters. And there's a gentleman that I look up to who was president of the Illinois Association of the Deaf. And I looked up to him as a young girl as I was growing up. And as I became older, I was involved in IAD, Illinois Association of the Deaf. And that man and his parents, and they passed on this to the next generations. Next slide, please. The third aspect of deaf culture is what we call norms, or things that we tend to do in order to communicate. It's important that the person that you're speaking to, if you're a hearing person learning sign language, make sure you maintain eye contact with the deaf individual when you're communicating. Don't be looking all over the place like you're distracted. Once you lose eye contact, it means you're not paying attention to the person. And it shows that you're uninterested in the conversation if you're looking around. So give it a hint of looking interested and keeping eye contact, and you can discuss and communicate, but eye contact is critical. It's crucial within the deaf community. And also space, giving yourself proper space to stand with one another. And also when you're walking, walking across the street, you maintain eye contact. You might be talking, and there could be cars passing or something, and you're communicating, but your eye contact is maintained. And people who um, are looking, oh, there's a message that came up. What is that? Okay. And you maintain eye contact. It's very important. So, how to communicate in sign language, um, how to get people's attention. There are a few ways of doing these things. You can tap someone on the shoulder. You can stomp. You don't hit hard. It's a subtle little tap on someone's shoulder, not on the back of the head, not on the face, on the shoulder. It can be a little wave in front of the person. You can wave in order to get someone's attention. You don't want to get right in their face, but you don't want to scare the person, but at a proper distance, you wave your hand. And then you could flash lights. That's another way of getting someone's attention. You don't do it on and off constantly, like a slow on and off for a short time. Those are various ways of getting someone's attention properly. And at my parents' home, we had oak wood floors and we would stomp our feet and we would stomp our feet, and we understood that we wanted that they wanted our attention. Or furniture, we would feel the vibration if they tapped on the furniture, and we'd go, "Oh, what's up?" And they would tell us what they wanted. So that's how we would get attention. There are many ways to get a deaf person's attention, but those are just a few. Sometimes if someone's really far away, you could have like a flashlight or something and say, "What's up?" And then you can talk with the person so they know. You could use a flashlight kind of to call that person closer. So that's cool. It's like flashing lights, and you can see what's going on, see what they wanted. Okay, the next slide, please. So the fourth aspect of deaf culture is recognizing one's identity, and that is crucial. It's really important to take a look at oneself. It's important to say, I am deaf and proud of being deaf. You're not down about it, saying, I can't do these things. No, it's a source of pride to be deaf, to recognize that one is deaf and you're part of a strong collective community. You're involved in events in the community, perhaps the Illinois Association of the Deaf, and you share those same cultural aspects as the community, and you give to the next generation of deaf children, and you pass that on to keep the traditions going. And we're proud. It really is a source of pride to be able to do all of this. It's really important. Other deaf people come from other countries. They share their culture, and I'm fascinated by what they have. It's really rich. We don't share the same deaf culture from other countries. It's just really beautiful, and we support one another. Our culture here in America, we share that, and in different countries, they don't shoo that away. We partner together, we collaborate, we cooperate, and we learn from one another. Sometimes identity within the disability community is different. They'll ask deaf people if they feel part of the disability community, and they'll say no, because we have our own group, our own culture. We have our deaf culture, and we're part of a strong community. We don't feel disabled. We're separate from the disability community, but it's hard for deaf people to accept that some people are disabled as well. So it's a different part of the disability rights community. We're allies, we're advocates. It's hard to really feel connected to the disability community. We feel somewhat separated from them. Next slide, please. So education. There are three different types of education. There's the residential school for the deaf, where you stay in dorms. and that's a residential school. Often there are many deaf teachers, there's dorm staff, they have communication access. There is no barrier whatsoever. You're socializing constantly. You sleep in the dorms. Um, you're there all week, sometimes on the weekend. So it's high stimulation with communication. You have communication access all the time. That's the residential school for the deaf is really a strong aspect of deaf culture. You have deaf coaches. You don't really have barriers. It's really open access everywhere at a residential school for the deaf. There are less than 50 deaf residential schools in the United States. Some schools have been closing, unfortunately, due to small enrollment. So they've been closing, and people have transferred to other states that do have a residential school for the deaf. Another type of educational program is a mainstream program where a person is in with other students with an interpreter and the teacher, and they also can teach deaf students. Some programs are okay, some don't believe in the theory of using sign language. They're forcing the students to be oral, meaning speaking or lip reading. So there are various types of programs out there. There is no dorm. And then another type of program is where you're the only person, the only deaf person in the school. There's no interpreter. You're just there learning, meaning that your experience with communication is much of a barrier because there is no communication really compared to the residential school and the mainstream program. There really is no communication when you're the only one in the school. And it's quite lonesome and isolating. I'll do a short explanation here for I went to Gallaudet University for graduate school to do my practicum. The teacher said that the students on campus that would be nice to teach hearing students would be their first experience. So the teacher warned us that be prepared for them trying to understand you as the instructor. So the students arrived and they were very excited and ready to go. And we started an activity, and later on, I realized a little bit, I felt off. All the students, I was like, are they all deaf? Are they all deaf? Why are they taking ASL? I was just like shocked. I didn't know what was going on. It wasn't a residential school, it wasn't a mainstream school. It was just, there were no interpreters, nothing, and they were just trying to learn on their own, writing back and forth. And as they grew up, they did not know any sign language. It was a room of deaf students, and they exhibited anger and frustration and everything. So I realized that sign language was so critical for their communication. And so they were taking a class, and then they came to my class and they remembered me, and I remember teaching them and during practicum, and they had picked up sign language so quickly. And it just gave me the chills because we grew up fighting for our rights and deaf culture and the deaf community and everything. So it was really wonderful that they learned how to sign. The next slide, please.
Let's talk about this acronym CODA. Where does that come from? Children of deaf adults. There really are many deaf parents have hearing children throughout the nation. Oh, let me back up and emphasize one thing. 90% of hearing parents 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. So only 10% of deaf children are born to deaf parents, and 80% those deaf children have hearing families. And that means they grow up with hearing families. Children of deaf adults learn to sign from their parents at a young age. And as they grow up, oftentimes they'll go to doctor's office or hospital or basically anywhere. They'll be, hey, would you mind interpreting for your own deaf parent? Wow, does that put a burden on a child? Those CODA children are often stuck trying to interpret things with words they don't know. There's a lot of technical jargon with regards to medical terminology, and it's just quite overwhelming. So then they end up just giving the salient points, but so much information is missed. So it's important that they get the right information. So the point is you can't use CODA children to be your interpreter. So you need to continue on that process. So what's really, really important is that you have an interpreter who's licensed because there is a big burden and too much of a burden on children. You just can't have that. Of course, because of the CODA movie several years ago, information spread quite rapidly. They received their Academy Award for that movie, and wow, lots of people begin to realize the separation that needs to be there between interpreters and interpreting at home. That communication's fine, but when it's vital information, you need to use a licensed interpreter, somebody who's a neutral party, especially if it's an emotional situation. Okay, next slide. For example, I'm going to respect Bode as the signed language plus spoken English, and they're able to go between the two languages. However, there's also different cultures. You think about somebody who speaks Spanish or something like that. A lot of language that needs to be traveled back and forth. And they have an intuitive sense of deaf people and they understand things. But again, you just have to be really careful. There's a deaf woman lawyer named Alexis Bashar. She worked with the NFL for doing the national anthem. She worked with them. She wrote a long paragraph about it. Okay, next slide. Okay, this section, deaf tendencies, called the deaf Bing. This happens, that happens. It's something that we see day to day. It's part of deaf culture. For example, somebody's telling me a story about some specific thing, and all of a sudden they'll trail off into some totally different thing. They give all the details of this other thing and head back to the point. Maybe you meet somebody. Say, hi, what's your name? Where you from? What state you grew up in? Oh, do you know this person and that person from that state? Well, did you work at the deaf school? Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. And the next thing you know, they trailed way off the main topic. I know their parents and they graduated from the deaf school. And oh, really? They travel all the way off to some other topic before they get back to the main point. It's just something we do. It's a habit. I don't know that hearing people do that so much. They try to stick to the point. That's it. But deaf people tend to head way off, hold on to that main idea, head way off and get into the sticks and get into the weeds discussing something else and then head back to the main topic. And it's normal. We don't think anything of it. Sometimes there's a large group of deaf people, like a social event or a social evening or a conference or a workshop of some sort. well, maybe a deaf club, even anywhere. Could be a sporting event. You'll see what somebody mentioned and you'll interrupt and say, whoa, 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 and you get their attention. Oh, yeah, 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 you're right, you're right. And they'll do this extra explanation. They actually end up joining the conversation by interruption. They might not even know the person, but for some, they want to participate. They want to have that bond and exchange that information and knowledge. So they'll find that it's important to go ahead and interrupt. And that's okay. It's a that. Sometimes, like in a swimming pool or someplace, people will be looking all over the place and they'll try to wave them down. They actually splash the water a little bit to get their attention. That's a deaf tendency to call somebody's attention. Like we said before, the flashing lights or tapping on the shoulder, things like that. If you're at a swimming pool or a lake, splashing a little water on somebody to get their attention might be another way to do that. People don't think anything of it. It doesn't make them angry, doesn't make them lose their temper. They're just like, yeah, it's fine. You called me. What do you need? Sometimes, perhaps in a restaurant or hotel, some big venue, there's lots of people milling around and lots of people signing, maybe an elevator or an escalator. Hearing people looking like, what is wrong with them? Are these people crazy? And no, it's just that we see somebody we know and we try to call them by waving at them or getting their attention by waving at them. So you're going up an escalator and there we are. We don't want to miss them. And so a lot of times the hand movements catch attention. Sometimes if I'm signing with somebody, they give somebody a pat on the shoulder, might be a pretty hard hit on the shoulder. And we don't think that it's mean. It might be that they're signing and they're trying to use their space to make a point. So instead of signing in a small space, they might sign in a larger space, and that ends up causing some physical contact. Glasses are a danger. They can be knocked off sometimes. Like an ID badge, like on a lanyard, that can flap up and get in the way too. And it's kind of laughable, really, but something deaf people do. Sometimes in a dormitory or an office or somebody that you know. You might like kick at the door or bang on the door because that's somebody you know and they ignore you on purpose, even though you're making a loud noise. They finally give up and they open the door and they know that you can get what you want. In the day, there was no doorbell with a flashing light. People would wave through the window to get our attention, to know that a friend had come by. And in the day, there was no texting either, right? So you'd have to go up to the window and wave. Sometimes you pick the water hose up and splash the window with that. People think, is it raining? No, I don't think it's supposed to rain. I look at the other windows and don't see any rain. That's how deaf people know that somebody's grabbed a water hose to get people's attention. Doorbell. And then a long time ago, I went to a friend's house. Oh, it's probably 2 hours away, but I didn't mind. We took the drive, and once we got there, we visited for quite a while. And then we got home, we wrote a note. Make sure you could get in the door. They'd slide something in there.
One time they weren't home.
So I left a note to let them know that I got there and they weren't home after driving all that way. So sometimes, well, deaf people oftentimes are very blunt. Sometimes the person doesn't look very happy. I'm like, you don't look happy. Are you okay? Tell me what's going on. Share with me. I'm here to support you. And it kind of puts the person on the spot, but then they go ahead and share. You do want to check in on everybody and make sure everybody's okay. So we are pretty blunt about that. Or like, wow, that shirt doesn't look good on you. Where it's messy. You need to iron it. Like whatever it is, we just tell it like it is. And people don't think anything about it. They think, wow, you are so rude. Why aren't you more polite? And to us, it's just normal. It's no big deal. There's other things too that you can select on the YouTube video. Go ahead to the next slide. Now, this is another example of culture. It's pretty universal. Hearing people like, hi, this is my friend. This is Christy. They'll say, nice to meet you. Remember, I told you about my deaf friend. He's the one that ate 15 eggs on a dare. And they'll be, you're talking about that guy? That guy, Brad? He dated my roommate's sister. Who knows? Your brother? A big, long, extra, protracted explanation. Really, it's TMI at that point, right? But it's what people do. They expand on that. It's just a habit that's passed down through the generations. Okay, next slide. Now, with regards to deaf culture, the next thing to look at is the history of deaf culture, the deaf community, the dinner table syndrome, and then some commonalities, common things. Go ahead, next slide. Deaf history is highly tied to deaf schools because people would graduate from there and they'd have the same teachers. There was one thing after another. They were in different sports, and those were things that they valued there. They might have their own museum, go and look around and see what the old school was like. Like the Illinois School for the Deaf used to have a marching band, right? There was somebody that beat the drum. It's just interesting to see all the different things that they had through the years compared to today. What we used to have a long time ago and we don't have any longer. It's important to preserve that history. And we want to build that to explain the reason why things are the way they are. Then there's deaf family traditions. The parents are deaf, siblings are deaf. My mom grew up in Wisconsin. My grandparents are all there, aunts and uncles, cousins. We moved to Illinois, and I went to the Illinois school, and I really, really valued that. A long time ago, there were deaf clubs. We think there were 7 to 9 throughout the suburbs. There's a lot of deaf clubs in the day, but now they've really reduced. A lot of times, deaf people have moved. There was a large printer that used to be here, and lots of deaf people worked there. It was easy work for deaf people to do. And so those deaf clubs would have sports. They'd have basketball, volleyball, softball, bowling, and socialize. There was always somewhere to go on the weekends to be part of a deaf club. There'd be picnics and events. Oftentimes at deaf clubs, they would have socials. They might have a performance. Might have somebody do a literature um, to show ASL literature and to show how people could learn from those historical pieces of evidence. And then there's sports, like the Deaf Olympics. And they're like, wow, there's a Deaf Olympics? Yep, deaf people have their own Olympics and their own sports from different countries.
For example, there's a softball team and they fly all over and they have different sporting games and that they attend. There's a bowling tournament in different locations, different tournaments. There's a lot of sports. There's pickleball. I recently went to Texas for the National Deaf Pickleball Tournament. Oh my goodness, there were probably 400 players, and we met new and old friends, and it was a real big social aspect. We saw some teachers. It was high energy and very stimulating. And the language, we could just communicate. I enjoyed it so much. We had the cost of flying there and hotel accommodations, but I didn't care. It was like one big family that I just cherished that time. And it's once a year where we can get together and do that. There's also cornhole. Many people go to that type of event as well in order to take advantage of socializing. They really value that. Softball has been dwindling a little bit over the years. Um, Pickleball and cornhole have become more popular because it's more individualized. It's an individualized support. You can save money, kind of. We just have strong bonds. Like in the past, there was a TV show. Oh, what was that? Oh my goodness. Where there's a deaf boy, Niles DeMarco. He was in America's Next Top Model, and he became very well known. And Niles, Niall, he's very popular on Instagram and Facebook and social media, and it just went viral with him. And there were so many links to him all over, and it just really, everyone was voting for him, and he won. And he won the Next Top Model, and then he did Dancing with the Stars, and Niles was involved with that. You know, he became like world renowned because of that, because being deaf, and we all voted for him and supported him. It was such an amazing time. And then we support different grassroots organizations. Um, and we support people. There's the Black deaf community. We are supportive of them. We listen to what others have to say. We have strong connections and strong links and bonds, and we're a very collaborative group. We're close knit, tight knit group. Getting onto organizations now, there are different organizations that we're involved in. There are different things that I feel comfortable um, being involved in, and so I'm very involved with the deaf community, and communication access is important. Someone who's hard of hearing might feel like someone who's will feel rejected by someone who's considered strong deaf. So you have to go with what's in your comfort zone. So a hard of hearing individual might look for an organization for them that they feel more comfortable with, maybe something like ALDA, Association of Light Deafened Adults. Um, Maybe they were hearing and later became deaf in life. So they would find an organization that matched their needs and what they would prefer to be involved in. So that's also part of deaf culture. Social media, we see many posts by deaf people. They're sharing, and you can learn something new, something that I didn't know prior, and it's just fascinating. And I share it with other people. I share with my ASL students. I have these things that are just fascinating. They're really wonderful to share, even from different countries. I really am intrigued by traveling and going on vacations to different areas. And I keep that in the back of my mind about what I've learned on social media. It's really wonderful. It's really great. So they invest their time to to share their positive and negative experiences. And I feel um, a sense of trust, and it's important for our community to really trust one another. Okay, the next slide. So within the deaf community, there are some different types of groups. There are people will ask me about the community. What is that like in the deaf community? Just the general community. I'll say the deaf community has their own subgroups. There's African American group. They have their own Black ASL, which is amazing. They've written books. They have deaf Black residential schools in Virginia. That one closed, but they have their own experiences. So Black deaf culture, um, I'm going to talk about that at the end. I went to something in February where they presented a workshop or a training. Oh, it will be happening in February rather. And it, it's Black ASL, and I highly recommend that. And then there's also in the second panel there, you'll see the LGBTQ IAP. They have their own organizations called the Rainbow Organization, and they have a chapter in Chicago. Many people have experienced internal struggles and they didn't know they hadn't experienced anything like this before, so they go to the right place, and with the right group of people, they can talk about their experiences, and they have different events that they host, and there's the backbone of the group with that they really enjoy, and they really have their culture, and there's deaf culture there at the top, and then underneath that, there's Black culture, there's LGBTQ. It's hard to spell that LGBTQIAP. They have that, and there's different groups within the deaf culture, and people need to find what is the best for them. We're open to everyone, and people have to find their comfort zone. Deaf women, it's called Deaf Women United. There's a Chicago Deaf Women United chapter. I'm one of the founders. Any women can come to socialize, young to old, it really doesn't matter. We have workshops, we get together, we learn from one another, and we have communication access. We
For example,
learn,
breast cancer survivors.
and we learn from one another. In terms of breast cancer, we can ask more questions. We can experience different things. Deaf color of people, deaf women of color, they can share their own space and they can talk about things related to them that others wouldn't understand. So they have their own space where they can share and talk about their frustrations and their experiences. And that's their comfort zone. Deaf youth, there are groups for young people under the National Association of the Deaf. We have a youth leadership camp. There's a national conference. There's a conference at the national level for national youth leadership, and where they can learn about different states getting together. Illinois does have, under the Illinois Association of the Deaf, they do have a youth program, and this ensures that we pass it down from generation to generation. So we need to help the youth um, learn this, not just older people. So there are many different examples within the deaf community. Hearing people don't realize that we have a deaf community that is so multifaceted. Next slide, please. Challenges and advocacy, different issues that we face. For example, the National Football League. During the Super Bowl, on the local TV, um, they hid the person who was signing. They didn't, maybe they panned across to the person who was signing and it was just for a split second. They should have had it picture in picture where you could see both the person signing and ASL. It is the third largest language used in the United States. Why could they not show the person signing on the screen with the performer? People who speak and hear have that. People who speak and hear Spanish can get that on their station, but they should have shown to the general public the person signing on the screen. So someone, like I had mentioned before, in 1905, they had invented the I love you sign. 1970s, 80s, somewhere around there, hearing people started making I love you things and marketing them. They took over what was ours. It belonged to the deaf community. We developed that. You know, small local businesses, that's my language. That's what I want. But deaf hearing people have taken over with selling of shirts and other merchandise. And we tend to be very direct to them and say, you can't take over like that. It's our deaf community, it's our business. You have many other things that, many other opportunities that you can do. Don't take ours. Access to resources and services are quite limited. Police departments, hospitals, doctors' offices still are resistant to providing interpreters. It's tough. It's tough. Many times we have to struggle to get access, and we file complaints and lawsuits in order to have our accessibility. And it's quite frustrating. It's my right to be able to communicate. Example, many years ago, like in France, they said that you could only um, speak and not sign. So we had to advocate for sign language. And same thing with drive-through fast food services. We want to be able to order from the drive-through, and also calling the police. We should be able to um, order from, like, we should be able to write or show a piece of paper with what we want to say. I had mentioned about the Deaf President Now back in 1988. I had already mentioned about that. And then we're very thankful for the Centers for Independent Living in Illinois. They've done wonderful work with accessibility. Thank you for being supportive and cooperative and being able to educate people who don't know, especially when there's turnover within the offices, when there's new staff that come in and out. Sometimes they may forget the requirements and they have to keep reminding them that you have to keep doing this. So thank you to the Centers for Independent Living. You're amazing.
Because the Centers for Independent Living have different areas, different specialists in deaf services and interpreting. Like Ursula and Angela work with regards to wheelchair accessibility. There's lots of different areas where the Centers for Independent Living help people with disabilities. It's amazing, truly amazing. I recall when I first had applied the Center for Independent Living, I didn't even know what it was. parents explained some about it. Like they distributed TTYs. We borrowed TTYs from there. I don't know. So I did a little bit of my homework, did a little of my own personal research. I was interviewed, and wow, it was such an honor because the late Diane Coleman, who just passed away, was the person who interviewed me. What an honor. I learned so much from her. I just can't imagine, I was deaf, but disability, as far as a deep knowledge of disability, I didn't have it. Diane took her time and valued the time to teach and explain things to me that really helped me grow. So I had a really tight bond with many people across the state of Illinois because of Diane. Well, the Centers for Independent Living are so important. Next slide. Oh, let's check the time here too. All right. So dinner table syndrome, DTS. I call it a syndrome. That we've seen more in the recent past. Like in the last couple of days, that people would say things about their dinner table experiences that's notable more and more throughout the area. For example, I said 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. That's quite a few. And deaf children are often frustrated with lack of communication access. And at the table, it'll be a big holiday or maybe a birthday party, some family gathering. And deaf people really feel left out. Many times the parents don't sign. It's an issue. Remember that 90% rule, many of them don't sign, even though their own child is deaf. They still don't know any sign language. They don't value gesturing as the child grows up, and that causes a lot of resentment. It grows quite a bit because the deaf person misses so much in their upbringing. Everybody's laughing and they don't know why. They just sit there and eat their meal alone. Now, of course, I didn't have that because I grew up with a deaf family. I had quite the advantage. I really had the advantage. I didn't have that lack of understanding. However, my father's side of the family, that big hearing family over there, they signed a little bit, gestured, wrote some. They didn't disregard us. I just felt like it was always part of everything. But oftentimes, like you go to school for the deaf, my friends there would say, "Hey, can I come to your house for the holidays?" I'm like, why do you want to come to my house for the holidays? Well, let me ask my parents. My parents were always very welcoming. They always welcomed deaf students to our home. We kind of were the deaf clubhouse. Come one, come all, because they understood. Oh, and you visit and talk, and they were so excited. Early in the morning, people would get up and they would talk and talk and talk to my parents from sun up to sun down because they would just talk to my parents so much. It wasn't until later when I finally was working at the Center for Independent Living, the PSIL really hit me. Wow, I was the only deaf person everybody else was hearing. And then the light went on. The picture was clear. Then I understood. I had to figure out how to work all that out with all my coworkers. I was like, would you mind learning some sign? And they were like, sure, sure, we'll do that. But I came to a clearer understanding. So a reminder is, with family members or friends, when there's a gathering, hey, would you mind please just tell me, like, don't say, hold on later, I'll tell you later. Hold on later, I'll tell you later. Everybody's talking and laughing. Well, by later, you're going to forget what they said. And they'll be like, oh, I forgot. I don't know. I'll tell you some other time. Children who are deaf. And, a lot of times Thanksgiving, Christmas, deaf people think it's a waste of time. It's lonely. There with a big crowd and they're oppressed to such a degree that you're like, I don't understand anything going on there. So that's what DTS is all about. Next slide. Okay, take a picture. Look at the picture. It tells it. It's isolating. It's heartbreaking. And part of deaf culture is deaf people kind of get used to it. Get used to it. But I still find it touching because it's not an experience I had growing up. Sometimes people are, oh, I'll tell you later. Don't worry about it. The family's all together, and then deaf person takes off, eats their food, and gets out. 30, half hours about all more they can take, and then they leave. Like my husband has a hearing family and a deaf brother. Even with the two of them there, feel like we're kind of in the middle. We're kind of half want to leave. I'm like, whoa, whoa, let's be respectful. We need to stay a while. And like, well, there's no communication here. That's what they do. There's no reason to stay. And so I kind of feel stuck. I understand his feelings because communication is key. That's part of deaf culture. Next slide. Oh, this is so common. Throughout deaf history, deaf people have made these lists and they're like, yeah, this, yeah, that. Like, when you go to pay a cashier, they start to talk to you and you point to your finger and say you're deaf. They get close and start screaming. I'm like, don't get close to me. You frighten me. Back off. You can't hear? No, I can't hear. I'm deaf. So you don't need to be yelling in my ear. They think deafness means I got some hearing left if they get close enough to yell, which is not the case. And then they'll say, hey, can you read my lips? I'm like, well, can you read my hands? That usually triggers a laugh. No, so you can follow their lead. Also, like years and years ago, McDonald's. Went to look at this sign. I decided to grab a piece of paper. I asked for help, and they ended up giving me Braille. I don't read Braille. And I was like, can you read Braille? Like, I don't know. I just need plain paper so I can write what I want so you can read it. Same thing in an airport. Recently, I flew to Texas about a month ago. I got into O'Hare. I told them I was deaf. If something happens, I need to be called. I need to know immediately. It's pretty universal. So I said, okay, hold on a second. And they kind of made weird faces. They looked away. And of course, the man drove off and grabbed a wheelchair for me. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. I wrote on the paper, well, you need to save your, I said, you need a wheelchair, save your wheelchair for somebody who actually needs it. But it's not me. And the guy was apologetic. I'm like, I didn't ask for a wheelchair. I asked for information. That's all I'm asking for because I'm deaf. Made it even worse by making me look like a fool. The same thing's true, like in a nursing home, for example, or a hospital. Trying to figure out which room the patient's in. Oh, they're deaf? Well, yeah. Which room are they in? Oh, come here. I can walk with you. I feel like they're putting me down. They don't think I could find the room by myself. All I did was ask the room number. I just asked for the room number, not a guide. Sometimes they'll even try to hold my hand. I'm like, stop. Oh, you're deaf. I'm so sorry. And then I say, you're hearing. I'm so sorry. That kind of gets them to quiet down. Sometimes if I shake somebody's hand, they'll put on their sanitizer in front of me. I'm like, wow, wow, what I've got is not contagious. Okay. It's my ear. It's my ear that's damaged. I was like, hey, can you drive? I say, yes, I can drive. Or one time there was was in an office working, and she was sitting there and kept looking at me down, and um, I was busy doing paperwork and whatever. And finally, the woman could sign. She said, "Wow, I'm trying to figure out how did you get to work?" I was like, "How did I get to work? Did you figure it out?" And she said, "Yeah, yeah." I said, "I figured it out. I drive." She said, You drive? How do you drive?" I was like, "What do you mean? How do you drive?" Well, I mean, your daughter's deaf. Mother said she needed to renew her license. So then they went over to the DMV, headed over there, and the woman that was working at the DMV took a look there, and they gestured to the daughter. She was 12 at the time. And the person said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You have to drive your daughter all over the community. That's so bad." And she's like, "My daughter can't drive yet." "Oh, it's because she's deaf, right?" Well, it's totally wrong information. I want to say that was probably 2004 or 2006, somewhere in there. Actually, at that time, I called Springfield to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, you guys are giving all the wrong information. This person needs to be reprimanded so that she can make sure she had the right information instead of jumping to conclusions." People are always like, "How do you know the phone's ringing?" Well, that's because of flashing lights. It is kind of funny. I remember my parents' house, we were all deaf, and we'd be playing outside with friends, playing basketball or whatever it was we were doing in the backyard. And I'd see those lights flash. Well, obviously, there's a big flash on and off, on and off. My brother would go running in the house and grab the phone, and he would try to grab the TTY and answer first. Sometimes hearing people would come in like, "Why is your brother so adamant about running off to get the phone?" Well, it's a thrill. I mean, sometimes, we call out. It's really, really important to answer so you can talk to somebody. So obviously it was a deaf house. You could see clearly when the whole house lit up. There's the other thing. Can deaf parents raise deaf children? The answer to that is yes. My parents are that example. Can deaf people live independently? Well, yes. That's kind of a silly question. Recently had the statewide deaf services coordinator meeting. There was a person that took their hearing aids off when they got to the airport for the TSA, and we asked them why they did that. And my husband, who's deaf, uses hearing aids. He said, "Yep, he's taking his hearing aids off because of the metal detector." I thought, well, then how do you communicate? It's interesting. What happens is, oh, go ahead. I just thought I'd share that. Go to the next slide. So, what's really key here? For example, Martha's Vineyard. That's in Massachusetts. At that time, it was a deaf owned island, actually. There were only deaf people there, deaf stores, deaf post office, deaf everything. Of course, that dwindled down over time and eventually went away. But that history's there in one of the buildings. They show the history of Martha's Vineyard. They show like the sailboats in Martha's Vineyard. You could look around. But there's still a lot of rich culture there and rich history information. But by and large, history is key.
Next is oralism versus sign language. This has always been a debate. We've had this issue regarding oralism versus sign language, and there's been this debate for many years. Some people feel that oralism benefits people, and others say that sign language is beneficial. Some people say using both. It's really up to you, up to each individual. Deaf activism, there are many deaf activists who roll up their sleeves and do the work to make sure that there are different organizations and movements and make sure that people are skilled and really are good at developing and growing. And they want people to be strong advocates and proponents for the deaf community. And there are leaders and there are followers, but the leaders are the backbone of the community. It's very important to um, be an advocate for the deaf community if something comes up. Activism is very important to take over and be a leader. And followers can learn, and we keep this going in order for the deaf community and deaf culture to keep going strong. We don't want it to fade away. That's why it's crucial about rights and accessibility and LEAD K, that's language equality acquisition for the deaf, kindergarten readiness. Different states have passed this. In Illinois, we're still struggling to pass LEAD K. Lurie Children's Hospital, they're very stubborn. They're strong lobbyists. They have a lawyer who doesn't believe in sign language there. He prefers oralism primarily, and that's for children 0 to 5. That's the critical language acquisition period. So they're ready for kindergarten. They become sponges at that age. From 0 to 5, the world is open to them and they can really acquire language. But at Lurie Children's Hospital, they say no, they don't believe in that, and there's a strong debate with them. So we've been working on this. Uh, we're trying to get it ready soon for this bill to pass in Illinois. Um, it would mean a lot to us, and within the deaf community, it's very important for us as far as language acquisition goes. And we're talking about employment rights as well that we are strongly activists for. Progress Center for Independent Living. We're involved with uh, working with employment, people who are dismissed or discharged or not hired because they're deaf or they can't hear, for a whole variety of issues. So we are advocates for that. We get attorneys involved, and I've learned a lot from my clients who come in and how to navigate the system. And it's really wonderful to do advocacy work. And teaching about communication, about signing or finding other ways to communicate, it's really crucial. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do all of us work together as one unified group? How do we do that? It's rather than being in different silos, how do we work together? Patience, communication, transparency, interpreters ready to go, providing interpreters. My cousin is hearing, and we're very close. And when I go to see her, I feel bad because, she's like, "Oh, I feel bad. I don't know sign language like you, and I should learn." And blah blah blah. That's wrong. When she's out with her boyfriend is a good friend of um, another person, and they talk. My cousin asked him, "What do you do for work?" And the guy said, "I'm an interpreter." And she was shocked. She said, "You mean an interpreter for deaf people?" And they said, "Yes." So she said, my cousin Carol is deaf. And they said, no, wow. And they said, do you know her? And it's a small world because that person had interpreted for me. So my cousin said, oh, I'm lousy, but she still could communicate when she's with people. So she can, she can still communicate. At a funeral home, there should be an interpreter there. Anytime that family gets together, they should hire someone and pay for the interpreter. There should be someone that comes to interpret. Don't feel like you're embarrassed or anything. Make sure that communication is open. Video relay interpreter, VRI. Like in a doctor's office or a hospital, they might bring in something, a device in the office, and maybe if they bring in a person, you don't like that. But if you have video remote interpreting, they might do that. You might feel better. Or an old school paper and pencil, that's still a way to communicate. And also learn sign language. It's a beautiful language. You'll enjoy it. At Progress Center for Independent Living, we'll offer sign language classes. We did in the past, and we can again online, or you can go to a college and take classes. You can learn from people in the community. Starbucks, they have an ASL signing group. You can go to that everywhere. There are places to learn. Next slide, please. Okay, just to put this all together here, never ask a deaf person, can you read lips? I feel stuck because then I have the duty to maybe read their lips and I have the responsibility, and I know that I'll be missing a lot of the information. It's better to bring in an interpreter or to write back and forth or go into another room and use a video phone to call. We could talk on the phone and I can sign and have an interpreter speak for me through the phone. There are different options rather than reading lips because the work falls on me. And I'm not a skilled lip reader. Never keep talking to a deaf person when they can't hear. That's not appropriate. Don't be afraid to talk with a deaf person. Just, learn something. Oh, you're deaf. How should we interact? What's the best way? It's important to learn how to communicate. If a hearing person knows some sign and then they start criticizing a deaf person, you never do that. Sign language is our native language. Respect our language. Don't criticize us. And finally, deaf people can do anything except hear. And that was from I. King Jordan. He was a retired president of Gallaudet University. And that's my favorite quote of his. He grew up hearing. I think it was either he was in the Navy or Air Force. He had some like accident and he lost his hearing. And then he transitioned to learning sign language. Next slide, please. Thank you all. Now it's your turn. You can ask me questions.
Claudia, did you have a question?
Oh, this is Herschel. Angela, do you want to join as well, please? Claudia, did you say something? No. Yeah, this is Herschel speaking. Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm deaf and I learned something as well. So I really am appreciative of your presentation today about deaf culture. Thank you, Carol is saying. And this is Angela. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. It was a great job. it was a wonderful presentation, so in depth with a lot of information for all of us. It was really great. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to
Claudia,
say something that at the residential school for the deaf and for deaf families, some people think, oh, they're egotistical or something because of that. And when you go into grad school, you take linguistics of ASL, and I had to take that, and let me just tell you, I learned so much. I thought I knew it all, but once I had to learn linguistics of ASL, I had to know about my language. Oh, it was fascinating, and it was really a wonderful way to learn more about ASL. Growing up, we didn't really learn the specifics of the linguistics of ASL. We were all just um, signing the same and doing everything. But so you're not alone. That happens that you learn new things. And this is, oh, I was reading some of the questions. Oh, please explain. Oh, Angela is saying there's a lot of information that we learned a lot. And I want to thank everyone. And Carol's saying thank you. Okay. And the questions, if you have questions, please. Someone asked about capital letter D and lowercase d. Could you explain that for capital D and lowercase d deaf? So the word deaf with a capital D and lowercase d deaf, there's less of a use with that. Many deaf people, if they're part of the deaf community, they identify strongly as deaf, so they use an uppercase capital D. Someone that uses lowercase d for deaf, they may have limited resources. They weren't part of the deaf community. They don't feel like they're part of that. So they're not part of that group. So really nothing happens, but they just feel that the word um, has no power or strength to it. But uppercase D refers to the culture and the community. So we don't measure someone's deafness, whether they feel a part of the community or not. It's their choice. And also hard of hearing, we've got uppercase and lowercase d, but also we have hard of hearing. Herschel's saying yes. So there's those aspects.
this is Shelley, and I will say that whenever I am writing, I always use the capital to address the whole community, because you don't know how a person feels or doesn't feel. So I just, strongly, for deaf and hard of hearing, I use the capitals. I do have a question too.
Okay, yes.
We have such a
Sometimes
shortage.
people use capital D deaf to remind people that how important it is to be deaf. It's a reminder. There's nothing right or wrong about it, but we um, we're involved in strong advocacy. We're part of a big community. We're not isolated. Um, where we went to school and where we grew up, those are all factors that indicate whether we use capital D deaf or not.
Concerning the problems with interpreter shortages, um, what is the group? Have you come up with ways here in the state of Illinois to help with that shortage? What discussions are being had about that?
Well, yes, we've had these concerns for quite a while, and Herschel is fortunate to be on the Illinois Deaf and Hard of Hearing Commission for the state of Illinois, and they've been working on that concern too. my opinion, the license is very expensive to pay. You have to pay for the transportation as well as their mileage, all those things. So, um, Herschel might know more about that. Maybe you could explain a little bit more in depth about the interpreter shortage and why it seems like it's been a problem. This is Herschel speaking with regards to interpreters and the shortage of interpreters. Well, I guess there's lots of different reasons why there's an interpreter shortage. But in some of them go off and do different work. Not enough interpreters in the community. A lot of times the interpreters don't have benefits. They don't get vacation, they don't get sick leave. And often interpreters are on their own, have their own business. And so they don't have any of those benefits. So then they're working to earn all that money. Oftentimes they'll transfer to a different area just because they need benefits. So that cuts down the number of available interpreters. Well, it's just part of the reason, at least. The other thing is the cost of getting their license. That I can't tell, but I think that's some of it. And that's something that the commission's working on moving forwards. Because like at the last commission meeting that we hosted, because we have one every year, was with an interpreter training workshop or seminar. We tend to have those in the past. Hopefully we'll be able to continue those again sometime soon and bring those back. And maybe at that time, COVID was a big disruptor. It's taken a while to get everything back into place. So there'll be lots of issues that we're trying to resolve. And like I said, we'll be trying to work on those through our meetings, but definitely interpreter is a big, big issue. Also, interpreter training. There isn't enough training in Illinois. And to meet those requirements for licensure, people have to have enough training. The number of schools providing interpreter training has reduced. Interpreter training programs are closing right and left. And that's caused a reduction in the interpreter's availability as well. There's just many factors that have contributed to this problem. Thanks, Herschel, Carol's saying. Okay, Carol is asking, are there any other questions?
There is one more question, Carol, on the Q&A. When it comes to public places like
Someone said it's very expensive to also maintain our CEUs, and we don't make great money, especially in the school systems, and also to renew those licenses.
And another question in the Q&A. When it comes to public places like the library, where we might have a tornado warning in a large building, but no flashing lights, what would you recommend if we need to find our deaf or hard of hearing patrons?
Carol's saying, I guess check with Angel a little bit because I know that's something they have been working on was accommodating. She might have notes on that for that kind of information, or perhaps email Angela about that. Specifically, you're talking about a community library where you are, and maybe she could help you do a little bit of follow up. Thanks so much for sharing that.
While we're waiting for the possibility of more questions, I want to remind everyone that as you close out of the Zoom session, there will be a brief survey. It's only 2 questions. Please take the survey. It helps us to improve the quality of our presentation. So I appreciate that.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions at this time? You can type them in the Q&A. If you are unable to do that, if you will raise your hand, we can unmute you so that you could ask your question.
Anybody scared out there? Too afraid to ask? One thing that I'd like to add, Angela says, it's from Tanya Covington, that Carol was my coworker for many years, and I sure appreciate her and all her information and grateful for all the help that she's provided in putting this together as well. Well, thanks so much.
Well, if all minds are clear, then I want to thank you very much for your attendance, and we look forward to seeing everyone in February for our introduction to deaf culture. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Great, great. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so
Thank the
much.
interpreters too. Thank you.
Great presentations. Thank